Chapter 25. Ali. Ali gazed upon the room that was to be Nahri's office with quiet approval. The completed window seat had been placed in the cozy alcove overlooking the street this morning, and he sank down upon the cushioned bench, pleased at how comfortable it was. Shelves within easy reach lined the alcove. This place would be perfect for reading. I hope she likes it. Ali gazed beyond the room, past the balcony that overlooked the hospital's inner courtyard. The sounds of construction, the final stages, came to his ears. I hope this hospital is worth the price we paid for it. He sighed, turning to peer through the wooden screen that looked out at the street below. It was as close as Ali could get to the slowly recovering Shafiq work camp. His father had made clear he would personally double the death toll from the attack if Ali so much as opened his mouth about it. There was a knock, and then Lubaid called out from beyond the archway. "Can I come in, or do you need a minute?" Ali rolled his eyes. "Come in." He turned away from the window. Not with your pipe," he scolded. He chased the other man back through the archway, waving the offensive fumes away. "You'll stink the place up." Lubaid's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Well, aren't you protective of your little Nahid sanctuary?" "I'm protective over everything here," Ali shot back, unable to check the defensive heat in his voice. Knowing Lubaid to be merciless in his teasing when he spotted weakness, Ali quickly changed the subject. "You shouldn't be smoking in the hospital anyway. Dr. Sen said she'd toss you out the next time she caught you." Lubaid inhaled. "What is life without risk?" He tilted his head toward the stairs. "Come, Akisai's back from the palace and waiting for you." Ali followed him out, returning the various salams and nods of workers as they passed through the hospital complex. His home and prison for the past 2 months, the hospital was now all but complete. Attendants were preparing for tomorrow's opening ceremony, rolling out embroidered silk carpets and conjuring delicate floating lanterns. A few musicians had arrived to practice, and the steady beat of a goblet drum echoed through the courtyard. He caught sight of Razu and Alashia sitting in a swing deep in the shade of a lime tree. Ali touched his brow in greeting as he passed, but neither woman appeared to notice him. Razu was tucking one of the tree's silky white flowers behind Elashia's ear, the ever-silent Sahrain woman giving her a small smile. It must be nice to have such a close friendship, he thought reflectively. Ali had Lubaid and Akisa, of course, and they were truer and more loyal friends than he deserved. But even they had to be kept at an arm's length. His many secrets were too dangerous to reveal entirely. Akisa was waiting in the shadow of the large foyer, dressed in plain robes, her braids tied up and bundled under a turban. "You look dreadful," she greeted him bluntly. "It's the eyes," Lubaid agreed, "and the shambling walk. Were he a bit bonier, he'd make a convincing ghoul." Ali glowered at them. Between his nightmares and the race to finish the hospital, he was barely sleeping, and he was not unaware his appearance reflected such a thing. "It's good to see you too, Akisa. How are things at the palace?" "Fine." Akisa crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. "Your sister sends her greetings." His heart twisted. The last time Ali had seen Zainab was when he'd been forced to break the news of their mother's imminent banishment. Though Hatzet had remained grimly calm, telling them both to be strong and that she'd be back, no matter Ghassan's orders, Zainab had broken down in front of him for the first time in his life. "Why couldn't you have just listened to him?" She'd wept as Ali was forcibly escorted back out. "Why couldn't you have held your tongue for once?" Ali swallowed the lump in his throat. "Is she okay?" "No," Akisa said flatly, "but she's surviving and is stronger than you give her credit for." He winced at the rebuke, hoping she was right. "And you've had no issues getting in and out of the harem? I worry you're risking yourself." Akisa actually laughed. "Not in the slightest. You may forget it at times, but I am a woman. The harem exists to keep out strange, dangerous men. The guards barely pay me any mind." She caressed the hilt of her khanjar. "If I do not point it out often enough, your gender can be remarkably stupid." The humor left her face. "No luck with the infirmary, however." "Still guarded?" Ali asked. "Day and night, by 24 of your father's most loyal men." 24 men? A wave of sick fear, his constant companion since the attack, rolled through him. He was even more worried for Nahri than he was for himself. Despite their strained relationship, Ali suspected his father was still unwilling to directly execute his own son. But Nahri wasn't his blood, and Ali had never seen anyone publicly challenge Ghassan the way she had in the ruins of the Shafit camp. He could still remember her, small in comparison to his father, exhausted and covered in ash, but thoroughly defiant, heat rippling through the air when she spoke, the stone street shivering with magic. It was one of the bravest acts he'd ever witnessed, and it petrified him, for Ali knew all too well how his father handled threats. Ali turned on his heel, pacing. It was driving him mad to be locked up here, trapped on the other side of the city from his sister and Nahri. A sheen of dampness erupted down his back, and he shivered. Between the day's rain and his roiling emotions, Ali was struggling to check his water abilities. Automatically, his gaze went to the corridor that led to Issa's room. At Hotset's request, the Ayanle scholar had stayed behind to continue looking into Ali's problem. But Ali wasn't optimistic. He didn't have his mother's touch with the erratic old man, and the last time he'd tried to check on Issa's progress, he'd found the scholar surrounded by a massive circle of parchment forming a family tree of what must have been every person even tangentially related to Ali. He'd rather impatiently asked what in God's name his ancestry had to do with getting the Marid out of his head, and Issa had in turn hurled a globe at his head, rudely suggesting that as an alternative. A shadow fell across them, the shape of a large man stepping into the shaft of sunlight coming from the garden.
"Prince Alizade,"
a deep voice rumbled.
"I believe your father made his orders clear."
Ali scowled, turning to glare at Abu Nuwas, the senior Gaziri officer sent to watch over him. "I'm not trying to escape," he said acidly. "Surely standing near the entrance is permitted." Abu Nuwas gave him a surly look.
"A woman is looking for you in the eastern wing."
"Did she give you a name? This place is crawling with people."
"I am not your secretary,"
Abu Nuwas sniffed.
"Some grandmotherly-looking shafit."
He turned away without another word.
"Oh, don't be rude,"
Lubaid said, when Ali rolled his eyes.
"He's only following your father's orders."
He blew out a ring of smoke.
"And I rather like that one. We got drunk together a few weeks ago. He's an excellent poet."
Ali gaped.
"Abu Nuwas is a poet?" "Oh, yes. Wonderfully scandalous stuff. You'd hate it."
Akisa shook her head. "Is there anyone in this city you haven't befriended? Last time we were at the Citadel, there were grown warriors fighting to take you out for lunch."
"The Emir's fancy crowd won't have me,"
Lubaid replied.
"They think I'm a barbarian. But regular Gaziri folk, soldiers." He grinned. "Everyone likes a storyteller."
Ali rubbed his temples. Most of Lubaid's stories were tales meant to bolster Ali's reputation. He hated it, but his friend only doubled his efforts when Ali asked him to stop. "Let me go see about this woman." The eastern wing was fairly quiet when Ali arrived, with only a pair of tile workers finishing a last stretch of wall, and a small older woman in a faded floral headscarf standing near the railing overlooking the garden, leaning heavily on a cane. Assuming she was the woman Abu Nuwas had meant, Ali crossed to her. Maybe she was someone's grandmother. It would not be the first time an older relative had come here searching for work for a ne'er-do-well youth. "Peace be upon you," Ali called out as he approached. "How may I—" She turned to face him, and Ali abruptly stopped talking.
"Brother Alizaid."
Sister Fatumai, once the proud leader of the Tanzim, stared back at him, her familiar brown eyes sharp as knives and simmering with anger. "It's been a long time." "I'm sorry to hear you're having trouble with supplies," Ali said loudly as he led Sister Fatumai away from the curious workers, ushering her toward a room packed with fresh linens. He was almost impressed he could lie, considering how rattled he was, but knowing the spies his father had filled the hospital with, he had little choice. "Let's see what we can spare." He ushered the Tanzim leader into the room, and after quickly checking to make sure they were alone, shoved the door closed and whispered a locking enchantment under his breath. A half-filled oil lamp had been left on one of the shelves, and Ali quickly lit it. The conjured flame danced down the wick, throwing weak light across the small chamber. He turned to face her, breathing hard. "Sister Fatumai," Ali stammered. I'm so sorry. When I heard what happened to Rashid and saw Sheikh Anas's masjid, I assumed that I was dead," Fatumai offered. "A fair assumption. Your father certainly tried his best. And honestly, I thought the same of you when you left for Amgazira. I figured it was a story told to hide the truth of your execution. You're not far from the truth." He swallowed. "The orphanage?" "It's gone," Fatumai replied. "We tried to evacuate when Rashid was arrested, but the royal guard caught up with the last group. They sold the youngest as servants and executed the rest." Her gaze grew cold. "My niece was one of the ones they murdered. You might remember her," she added, accusation lacing into her voice. "She made you tea when you visited." Ali braced himself on the wall, finding it hard to breathe. "My God. I'm so sorry, sister." "As am I," she said softly. "She was a good woman. Engaged to marry Rashid," she added, leaning against the wall as well. "Perhaps a small consolation that they entered paradise as martyrs together." Ali stared at the ground, ashamed. She must have noticed. "Does such speech bother you now? You were once one of Sheikh Anas's most devout students. But I know faith is a garment worn carelessly by those who live in the palace." I never lost my faith. Ali said the words quietly, but there was a challenge in them. He'd only met Sister Fatumai after Rashid, another member of the Tanzim, had tricked him into visiting their safe house, an orphanage in the Tukharistani quarter. It was a visit designed to guilt the wealthy prince into funding them, a tour to show him sick and hungry orphans, but conveniently not the weapons he'd learned they were also purchasing with his money. Ali had never gone back. The Tanzim's use of violence, possibly against innocent Daevabadis, was not a line he would cross. He changed the subject. Would you like to sit? Can I get you something to drink? I did not come here to enjoy Gaziri hospitality, Prince Alizade. She shifted on her feet. Beneath the tired exterior and silver hair, there was steel in Fatumai, and it chastened him as much as it concerned him. There had been heart in the Tanzim. They'd saved and sheltered Shafit children, put books in hands and bread in mouths. Ali didn't doubt for a second that they were believers, as God-fearing as he was. He also didn't doubt that quite a few of them had blood on their hands. Are the rest of the children safe? She laughed, a hard sound. You really don't know your father, do you? Ali almost couldn't bring himself to ask the question. What do you mean? Do you think it mattered to Ghassan that some were children? She clucked her tongue. Oh no, Brother Alizade. We were a danger. A threat to be tracked down and exterminated. We came into his home and stole the heart of his youngest, so he sent his soldiers tearing through the Shafit district in pursuit of us. Of anyone related to us. Family, neighbors, friends. He killed scores. We were so desperate to escape, we tried to flee Daevabad itself. Flee Daevabad? You were able to hire a smuggler? Hire is not the word I'd use, she said, a deadly finality in her voice. Not that it mattered. I volunteered to stay behind with those who were too young for such travel, and the ones who had too much magical blood to be able to pass in the human world. Her voice quivered. The rest. I kissed their brows and wiped their tears, and watched as your father's firebirds burned the boat. Ali reeled. What? I'd rather not repeat it if you don't mind, she said flatly. Hearing their screams as the lake tore them apart was bad enough. I suppose your father thought it was worth it to take out the handful of Tanzim fighters who were with them. Ali abruptly sat down. He couldn't help it. He knew his father had done some awful things, but sinking a ship full of fleeing child refugees was pure evil. It didn't matter who Ghassan had been hunting. He should not be king. The blunt, treasonous thought burst into Ali's head in a moment of terrible clarity. It suddenly seemed simple. The loyalty and complicated love for his father that Ali had long struggled with, snipped away as someone might cut a strained rope. Fatumai paced farther into the chamber, oblivious to his pain, or perhaps rightfully uncaring about the prince having a breakdown on the floor. She ran her hands along the stacked supplies. "A lively, organized place, this seems," she commented. "You have done extraordinary work that has truly changed the lives of innumerable Shafit. Ironic, in a way, that it happened here." That immediately pulled him from his thoughts. "Meaning?" She glanced back. "Oh, come, brother, let us not pretend. I am certain you know what once happened to the Shafit in this so-called hospital. Your namesake certainly did, though it is absent from the songs spun about his mighty deeds." She shrugged. "I suppose there's little glory in tales of plague and vengeance." Her words were far too precise to be a mistake. "Who told you?" he asked haltingly. "Anas, of course. Do you think you're the only one with a skill for combing through old texts?" She leveled her gaze on Ali. "He thought it was a story that should be spread far more widely." Ali closed his eyes, his hands clenching into fists. "It belongs to the past, sister." "It belongs to the present," Fatumai returned sharply. "It is a warning of what the Devas are capable of, what your Nahid is capable of." His eyes shot open. "What we are all rather capable of. It was not Devas who murdered your children on the lake, nor was it Devas who burned this place to the ground and slaughtered everyone inside 14 centuries ago." She stared at him. "And why, brother? Tell me why the Gaziris and Shafit torched this place with such fury." Ali couldn't look away, and yet he couldn't not answer. "Because the Nahid Council experimented on Shafit here," he confessed softly. "Not just experimented," Fatumai corrected. "They created a poison here. A pox that could be mixed with paint. Paint that could be applied to what exactly, my warrior friend?" "Scabbards," he answered softly, sickness rising in his chest. "They're soldiers' scabbards." "They're Gaziri soldiers," she clarified. Let's get our facts straight. For that's all the Nahid Council said your tribe was good for. Fighting and, well, we'll not say the impolite term, but making more soldiers to fill the ranks. She met Ali's stony gaze. But the pox wasn't designed to kill the purebloods who wore those scabbards, was it? Water was pooling in his hands again. No, he whispered. It wasn't. That's right. It didn't do a damn thing to those soldiers. Sister Fatumai replied, a savage edge rising in her voice. They happily headed home to Amgazira, that insolent, restless little province, one filled with too many Shafit and too many djinn relatives who would spirit them away into the desert when Deva officials came to drag them to Daevabad. She tilted her head. Zaidi al-Khatani had a Shafit family, didn't he? His first family? Ali's voice was thick. He did. And what happened when he returned home on leave? When he let his children play with his sword? When he removed his scabbard and touched the beloved wife he hadn't seen in months? He woke beside their bodies the next morning. Ali's gaze flickered unwillingly to the hilt of his own sword. Ali had read of their fate in a misplaced biography when he was a child, and it had given him nightmares for weeks. To see the people you loved most dead at the hands of a contagion you'd unknowingly given to them. It was something that would drive a man mad, would drive a man to return to his garrison and put his khanjar through the throat of his Deva commander, to lead a revolt that would reshape their world and ally them with the Marid against his fire-blooded fellows. To perhaps, in the dark quiet of his soul, purposely allow the slaughter of a hospital. Fatumai was studying him. You've told no one of this, have you? Afraid your Shafit friends would rightfully run your Banu Nahida out? Her words struck, but that hadn't been the reason. The excitement in Nahri's voice, the cautious interest he'd seen from Subha when they first visited. Ali hadn't had the heart to destroy those things. And for what? To point out for the 100th time the ghastly acts their people had committed so long ago? No, I wasn't afraid. I was tired. Ali's voice broke on the word. I'm tired of everyone in this city feeding on vengeance. I'm tired of teaching our children to hate and fear other children because their parents are our enemies. And I'm sick and tired of acting like the only way to save our people is to cut down all who might oppose us, as if our enemies won't return the favor the instant power shifts. She drew up, Bold words for the son of a tyrant. Ali shook his head. What do you want from me? He asked wearily. She gave him a sad smile. Nothing, Prince Alizade. Respectfully, all that would make me trust you again would be seeing your father dead by your hand. I am finished with the politics of this city. I have 10 remaining children who depend on me. I will not risk them. Then why are you here? Fatima touched a tray of tools. I came to pass on a warning. Ali tensed. What warning? Your little speech about vengeance, Alizade. There are Shafit who don't long to work at your hospital. Ones who would make the Tanzim look like Deva sympathizers. People whose anger could bring this city to its knees, and who would never forgive a Nahid for the past, no matter how many Shafit she heals. I've lost some of my older children to them. They watched their friends die on the lake, their neighbors sold on that auction block, and they want nothing more than to see you so-called purebloods suffer. And your Nahid should fear them. Ali was on his feet the next moment, but Fatima held up a hand. There are whispers that an attack will happen during Navasatam, she explained. I will not reveal who I learned it from, so do not ask. What kind of attack? Ali asked in horror. I don't know. It is a rumor, and a thin one. I only pass it on because the thought of what the Devas and the royal guard would do to us in retribution terrifies me. She turned to go, her cane tapping the stone floor. Sister, wait! Please! Fatima was already pulling open the door. That is all I know, Alizade al-Khatani. Do with it what you will. Ali paused, 1,000 responses hovering on his lips. The one that made it through was a surprise to him. The little girl we saved, the girl from Turan's tavern. Is she all right? The cold grief in Fatima's eyes told him the truth before she uttered the words. She was on the boat your father burned. Night had fallen, the sky in the window behind Ghassan the silver-purple color of twilight, and heavy with fog from the day's warm rain. Ali had all but paced holes in the hospital's courtyard before realizing that however little he wished to see his father, security for Navasatam rested here. Ghassan looked unconvinced. An attack during Navasatam? Who told you this? A friend, Ali said flatly. One I will not be able to track down again. And she knew nothing more anyway. Ghassan sighed.
I'll pass your concerns to Wajed. Ali stared at him. That's it? His father threw up his hands. What else would you have me do? Do you know how many vague threats we get about the Devas? About Nahri? Especially after the attack in your work camp? So increase her security, cancel the procession, cancel anything during which she'll be exposed. Ghassan shook his head. I will not be canceling any Deva celebrations on your word. I care not to hear Kaveh screeching about it. A vaguely hostile expression flitted across his face. Besides, Nahri seems to think rather highly of herself lately. Why should I protect someone who so openly challenges me? Because it's your duty, Ali said aghast. You are her king, her father-in-law. Ghassan scoffed. Considering the state of their marriage, I am hardly that. Ali couldn't believe what he was hearing. She's a woman under our roof. Her protection is part of our highest code, our most sacred, and I will speak to Wajed. Ghassan interjected in a tone that indicated the conversation was over. He rose to his feet, making his way to the windowsill. But on another matter, your timing is good. The hospital is ready for tomorrow's opening ceremony? Yes, Ali said, not bothering to conceal the bitterness in his voice. I can report to the dungeon after it's over if you like. Ghassan picked up a black velvet case that had been resting near the window. That's not where I'm sending you, Alizaid. There was a grim decisiveness to his voice that put Ali on edge instantly. Where are you sending me? Ghassan opened the case, staring at whatever lay inside. I had this made for you, he said softly. When you first returned to Daevabad, I had hoped, I'd even prayed that we might find a way past all this as a family. He pulled free a magnificent length of dyed silk, patterned blue, purple, and gold, twisting together over its shimmering surface. A turban. A royal turban like the one Muntadir wore. Ali's breath caught. Ghassan ran his fingers over the silk. I wanted to see you wear this during Navasatam. I wanted so much to have you at my side once again. At my side. Ali fought to keep his face blank, because for the first time in his life, those simple words, that reminder of his duty as a Gaziri son, the offer of one of the most privileged and safe positions in their world, it filled him with absolute revulsion. There was a tremor in his voice when he finally spoke. What do you plan to do with me, Abba? Ghassan met his gaze, a storm of emotion in his gray eyes. I do not know, Alizaid. I am near equally torn between declaring you my emir and having you executed."
When Ali's eyes widened, he pressed on.
"Yes, you are beyond capable for the position. It's true you lack in diplomacy, but you have a keener command of military matters and the city's economy than your brother ever will."
He dropped the turban cloth.
"You are also the most reckless and morally inflexible person I have ever come across. Perhaps the greatest danger to Daevabad's stability since a lost Nahid strolled in with an Afshin at her side."
His father came around the desk, and Ali found himself stepping back, the air sharp and dangerous between them. And God forgive him, as Ghassan moved, Ali's gaze fell on the dagger at his father's waist. Zaidi al-Qahtani's rebellion had started with a dagger through a throat. It would be so simple, so quick. Ali would be executed. He'd probably go to hell for killing his own father. But Daevabad's tyrant would be gone. And then Muntadir would take the throne. He could see his brother doing so, panicked, grieving, and paranoid. He'd almost certainly lash out, arresting and executing anyone associated with Ali. Ali forced himself to look into his father's eyes. "I've only ever tried to act in Daevabad's interest." He wasn't sure whether he was speaking to his father or the dark urge in his mind. "And now I'm going to invite you to act in your own," Ghassan said, seemingly unaware of the deadly thoughts swirling within his son. "I'm sending you back to Amgazira after Navasatam." Whatever Ali had expected, it was not that. "What?" he repeated faintly.
"I'm sending you back. You will formally renounce your titles and find a way to thoroughly sabotage your relationship with the Ayanle, but you will otherwise return with my blessing. You may marry a local woman and tend to your crops and your canals with whatever children God grants you."
Is this a trick? Ali was too stunned to even be diplomatic.
"No,"
Ghassan said bluntly.
"It is the last resort of a man who does not wish to execute his son."
He looked almost imploringly at Ali.
"I know not how to get you to bend, Alizaid. I have threatened you. I have killed your Shafit allies, banished your mother, sent you to be hunted by assassins. And still you defy me. I am hoping your heart proves weaker than your sense of righteousness. Or perhaps wiser."
Before Ali could stop himself, he saw Bernabat in his mind, his students and his fields, himself laughing over coffee with Lubaid and Akisa. A wife, a family, a life. One away from Daevabad's blood-soaked history and Marid-haunted lake. Ali felt like he'd been punched in the stomach.
And if I refuse?
Ghassan looked exasperated.
It is not an offer, Alizaid. You are going. For God's sake.
A desperate note entered his voice.
Will you let me give at least one of my children some happiness? You wanted to go back, didn't you?
He had, desperately. Part of Ali still did. But he'd be leaving his home to a king he no longer believed deserved to rule it.
Do not offer me this,
he begged.
Please.
Ali's warring desires must have been plain on his face, because a quiet remorse swept his father's.
I suppose I've forgotten there are situations for which kindness is the most powerful weapon.
Ali was shaking.
Abba.
But his father was already leading him out.
My men will take you back to the hospital. Your conditions remain. Wait, please.
This time, the door closed softly in his face.